think we'll go ahead and get started. I'm Cornell Clayton. I'm the director of the Thomas S. Foley Institute here at WSU, and on behalf of the Institute, I want to welcome you out to our event today. Before I introduce our guest, I want to remind you of two other events we have upcoming. One is tomorrow at 2 p.m. in the Cub Auditorium. We're going to be holding a panel debate about the carbon initiative in the state of Washington. And we have a really terrific panel for that, people both for and against. That's at 2 p.m. in the Cub. We will also hold that same event up in Spokane on our Spokane campus at 7 p.m. if you happen to be up in Spokane and want to catch it there. The other event I want to remind you about is next week, next Wednesday on October 26th. We'll be holding another candidates debate, this time for candidates in the 9th Legislative District. Mary Dye and Jennifer Boulay, who are competing for that seat. That's 4:30 p.m. in this room. So now I want to welcome Dr. Ed Weber, who will be talking about the wicked problem of climate, water, and energy, particularly in rural areas. Professor Weber is the Dubach Professor of Political Science at the School of Public Policy at Oregon State University. He received his PhD from the University of Wisconsin. He's published extensively in the area of public policy, public administration, and environmental politics. Ed is also one of our former colleagues here in political science at WSU. He's also a former director of the Foley Institute, so it's really a pleasure for me to welcome him back to campus. Ed Weber.
Thank you, Cornell, and thank you all for being here. It's good to be back in Pullman. You've got a nice day outside, and we've already described the audience as the non-wall protesters, okay? Because it seems that everybody else on campus is out there looking at a wall. Okay, so I want to talk about the wicked problem of water, energy, and climate change. But as you can see, the real title I wanted, otherwise known as, it's a little clunky. So Cornell and Richard Elgar here at the Foley got me to change it. But basically, when you take a look at it, you will see bits and pieces of all those things: water, water rights, energy, farmers, as well as economy, fish, and climate change. And really what we're going to look at are local solutions for wicked problems. I've been working on wicked problems now for the last 8 years. Have a new book coming out with Denise Lack and Brent Steele and authors from across the globe that comes out next spring. And it's called New Strategies for Wicked Problems, Science and Public Policy in the 21st Century. And so this kind of flows out of that larger research agenda. Okay, so what we have here is the water-energy nexus. The question is it an unsustainable trajectory? We know that water and energy are critical to human survival. There are challenges, however, that some people believe might well be creating an unsustainable trajectory. So the idea is water scarcity, but not just water scarcity, but more water scarcity. Okay? Population growth, and of course most of that is centering in urban areas. Increasing demand for energy and electricity. Okay? That's a constant challenge. It's not going to go away, even with our efficiency gains in technology. And climate change. Especially when we look at the rural West, especially when we look across the West to arid and semi-arid areas. Climate change models are predicting it's going to be a lot drier. We're going to have changing forms of precipitation, so more rain, less snow. It's also going to be different timing. It's going to come at different times of the year, so our hydrobaths are going to change. And currently, the way we've designed our systems don't really match up well with what we're expecting in those timing changes. Okay. In terms of the impacts of this basic water-energy nexus, in the urban areas, where will the water come from? Given that in most Western states, agriculture controls 75% or more of the surface water rights. And in the rural areas, when we think about the localized effects in communities that have substantial irrigated agriculture, they're going to face some enormous challenges. Of course, neither one of these challenges are entirely new, but the argument here is that as we move forward into the future, they are likely to become more acute in many areas. Okay? So it's all piling up. There's a cumulative effect. But what I'm going to focus on here are rural and irrigated settings in the U.S. West. I call it an incongruous mix of added challenges. So on top of what I just stated. So for those of you who study these kinds of things, this isn't news either. We've got fully or over-allocated water rights for streams in much of the American West. So there isn't any water left to allocate to new demands. We have a water law system known as the prior appropriations doctrine. First in time, first in right. So if you divert it first and you start using it, you have the most senior rights. Part of that is the use it or lose it. We have parts of that law that says if you don't use it over a certain period of time, you will literally lose your legal right. So that gives you an incentive to keep using whatever that right is. And most use is consumptive. So it does not return to the river, or in the cases where it does return to the river, often you run into pollution issues and those kinds of things. All right. Another challenge, pressures to alter use and save for environmental protection. Okay, that equals less water to meet population and economic growth demands. So again, what's good for the environment is going to be less water for humans. Okay, so you have things like the 1973 Endangered Species Act, the 1972 Clean Water Act, especially when it comes to water quality. And what we see in a lot of these irrigation systems, you've got temperature concerns. So low water usually means less oxygen, higher temperatures. That can cook the fish, literally cook the fish. Okay, so those are the kinds of issues we're talking about. And again, I've already mentioned the arid and semi-arid settings. The historical challenge has always been there. You know, dry years come and go with some regularity in these climates. But what we're arguing is when you add in the climate change and you add in these new challenges, we are expecting to see this on a more regular basis in many different parts of the West. So what does it all add up to? A wicked problem. This is a wicked problem that I'm describing of water, water rights, energy farmers, economics, fish and ecology, and climate change. Wicked problems have high complexity. They're unstructured, so the parts are interconnected in ways that are hard to model scientifically. Uncertainty is the rule. Unintended consequences are more likely. High informational demands are the norm. Problem solving is fluid. Because of the complexity, each solution changes the understanding of the problem and sometimes the parameters of the problem. Wicked problems are cross-cutting. Legal jurisdiction, so it cuts across legal jurisdictions, policy areas, interests and stakeholders. There are many trade-offs among competing values in these scenarios. You've got diverse perspective. You've got high conflict potential. Okay, and in these areas, there's a higher dependency among stakeholders. Put differently, no one single stakeholder is likely able to solve this set of problems on their own. They need each other. And relentless is the third characteristic of a wicked problem. There's no finish line. It cannot be solved once and for all. So please forgive me as I move through the slides. I am going to use the word solve, even though, according to the definition, that's not possible. Okay. The old system. What I want to do is I'm looking at White's Creek. Okay, and this is representative. If you understand water and irrigation systems throughout the West, and I've been studying watershed management throughout the West for going on 20 plus years. Spent a lot of time in New Zealand studying similar types of systems with watershed management. And you will see that this is very typical in many settings. Having said that, I'm not trying to claim that this is exactly the case, but these are common types of things that you will find in irrigation systems, okay? So I'm calling it the old system, call it the historical system, call it the traditional system. This comes out of prior appropriations where the ag interests were often the first ones there. They diverted the water to grow crops, okay? They have the most senior water rights, and so you have these irrigation districts throughout the West. We're looking at White's Creek. It's a 40-mile tributary of the Deschutes River in central Oregon. The Three Sisters Irrigation District, we call it TSID, is the irrigator. There are 200 plus farms. Its traditional system is a canal-fed and water delivery system, and we're looking at 50% water loss through fractured basalt. So it's a highly inefficient system in terms of delivery. Okay, so if we try to break that wicked problem down a little, in other words, in the same way, I've done it in this table. On the left side of this table, you will see the policy goals. Okay, so you'll see things like energy production, because again, part of the water energy nexus and what we're concerned about is we need to figure out how to produce more energy. Okay, responsiveness to climate change, carbon-free energy sources, the ecology and the fish part of the equation, ecology and the adequate stream flow. So do you have enough volume in the river? You've got water quality concerns. Here's the Clean Water Act again. And I'm going to have to put these glasses on. This is what happens when you get old. I thought I could read these slides, but I cannot, especially with the light white. I should have picked different colors. Okay. You've got habitat and riparian zone health. And then you've got general economic benefits, okay? And the additional economic benefits to the users, this is something that really doesn't make sense until we go to the next slide, okay? And so I'll talk about that more there. And then water reliability, okay? This is the idea of high certainty, guaranteed delivery to all the users, okay? So if you walk through that, you see over on the right, you've got a lot of no's, and you've got a lot of things saying, hey, this is problematic, like for the Clean Water Act, right in the middle of the slide. You've got regular exceedances of the temperature standard. Yes, you've got agricultural revenue, so the economic part of the equation, which again, this is what the traditional system using prior appropriations is designed for, so no surprise there. But if you look at the stream flow, I mean, 2 out of 3 years of Wyches Creek, there's literally no water in significant stretches of that stream. It just doesn't flow. It's being taken out for irrigation purposes. What you have on the energy production at the top, no, they're only using and consuming, okay? And so there is no production of carbon-free energy within the system currently. So that kind of sets us up. Yes?
What do you mean by traditional water delivery system? What is that?
That's what I've been talking about in terms of the canals, the traditional open canal system, often gravity flow, but sometimes you're pumping, and in this case you're doing some gravity flow, but you're also using electric pumps to take the water and pump it up onto your property in order to distribute it. Okay? All right. So, the new integrated system responsiveness to the wicked problem set. This is Wyches Creek again. So you will see, and I apologize for the small font, but essentially, once you work through this case and what's happened, here is where they are today in this particular system. Now, after I talk about this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask the question, how did we get here? Okay? Because I just gave you point A, and what this is point B. All right? And so the real story here is how did we get from point A to point B? Because notice the major difference in the table. You've got the same components on the left, the pieces of the wicked problem. Over on the right, I could have just pretty much put yes in all of these. So, and in fact, I do have a table that just has the yes, or very simple. But for this presentation, what I wanted to do was obviously to give you some detail. So let's walk down it. I won't cover every single one, but here we go with the energy production. Okay, as part of the new integrated water delivery system, they built 2 small hydro. One's actually completed, the other is in process. That's going to produce 6 million kilowatt hours per year. The equivalent on an average cost of electricity in Oregon at this time, about $620,000 a year. They've got a 3rd hydro plant in the planning stages. So we've got small hydro. The completion costs on these are 20% less than what they're building small hydro for in terms of the national average. Okay, responsiveness to climate change, yes. By the fact that you've got hydropower, you've got a carbon-free energy source that is now in this system. Now, of course, again, when you think about traditional hydropower, the first thing that always pops to my mind, oh my gosh, we've got hydropower, what the heck, the fish are dead. Okay? I mean, in other words, because hydropower, traditionally, it's tough, especially the bigger the dam gets, it's tough, and it does pose problems for fish. We build fish ladders, we do things like that. But in this case, what you're going to see going down to ecology and fish is the hydropower is not drawing directly from the stream in the sense that you're building a dam across from it. They built a pressurized piping conduit system, and it only comes into that pipe after you've built an ESA-compliant, fish-friendly screen, which basically means you get the water, you don't get the fish. Okay, that was a $1.2 million screen, by the way. So these things are not inexpensive. All right. So in terms of the overall picture, 10 out of 17 screens involving 83% of all water withdrawals are now ESA compliant. Prior to the start of this effort, only 2% were ESA compliant. There were 6 diversions on the river blocking fish passage. All 6 of those have been removed. They planted 2 million plus steelhead, chinook, red-bound trout, so they've been released into the stream. The spawning data, the red counts are improving, but they are still low vis-a-vis historical counts. So quite a bit of progress, but in terms of the actual results, it's going to take more time, and that's still an open question. Okay, the ecology, the adequate stream flow. The new pressurized system creates shared savings for the environment equal to 25% of total water rights. So what you have here is they put 24 CFS, cubic feet per second, back into the stream. It's now permanent. This meets the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife standard. This will increase to 33 CFS in 2018. Give me some movement on that 2018. I'm trying to get information back from the group that's working on this, and that could be 2019. But anyway, within the next few years. Okay. Water quality, Clean Water Act issues. Only one exceedance in the Sisters measuring station in 7 years since they put a minimum of 20 CFS back in the river. So that's 2008 to 2014. Still struggling with exceedances downriver. Okay, so they still are having problems under the Clean Water Act. But the expectation is that when that 33 CFS hits the river, that's going to more than take care of those Clean Water Act violations down below. Okay, habitat riparian zone benefits, I'll let you read most of those, but essentially they've taken a channelized stream and literally ripped it up and put it back into a natural path. They have planted hundreds of thousands of things. They've got restored wetlands. They've seen beavers back in parts of this system that they haven't seen, what do I have here, in 80 years. Okay, so you can see they've purchased land, things like that. Okay, economic benefits in general, yes, you still have the agricultural revenues. Here's the one I didn't talk about, the additional economic benefits to the users. And this is critical. Think about it if you're the irrigator, okay? People want to do all this environmental protection, but you're saying they're going, holy cow, that just means that I'm going to make less, that's going to make me less economically viable. Well, what you have in this particular system, you know, the 50 miles of new pressurized piping system allows for the removal of 100 electric pumps. This was an expensive get. We're talking in the tens of millions, okay? But what they did was they had grants, they've got payback from the hydro revenues, and they've got water sales, okay? So they are getting paid to put that water back into the stream. Yes?
Is that dam, are the two small hydro units together 700 kilowatts, or does each unit produce 700 kilowatts?
You know what? That's a really good question. I'd have to go back into my paper. Because there's part of me says that's the combined, but I think it's the individual. So I'd have to go back in and look at the details. Okay. If you did the math, you'd be able to figure out which one it was. Okay. But yes.
I have a question about water sales to whom?
Right. In this case, when the water is going back into the stream, it's being sold to the state.
Okay.
Okay. So the state is purchasing it. In other cases, across the West, environmentalists purchase those kind of water rights.
So it's
Okay.
not Nestle and groups like that?
Not in this case.
Okay.
That's down along the Columbia, the case that you're talking with the bottled water.
Well, it's all across the
Right,
U.S.
right.
Yeah.
But no, there's nothing here with respect to that. And again, so you've got revenue coming in those cases. So look at the typical 200-acre farm. They're saving $20,000 a year in electricity costs. Okay, you've got increased revenues from water sales. We've just talked about that. You've got more water to use because the more efficient system actually allows them to put a quarter of the water back in the system, but because they were losing so much to seepage and evaporation, it also allows for them to have more water to do with. Okay, I'm seeing, sorry Richard, I'm seeing a restart your computer now. Just, okay. Postpone? Okay, all right. I was like, okay, I don't see it up there, but all right. Okay, so, one of the interesting things too is low reliability costs. The closed piping system versus the open canals decreases liability and maintenance costs, saving millions of dollars a year for the irrigation district. Water reliability, strong guarantee of water even for junior rights holders, even during dry and drought years. That's a big one for the junior water rights holder, because when you have droughts, they're the ones who usually don't end up with money. Yes?
Now, I'm an agricultural economist, and what we've seen here in Washington is when you conserve water with low-pressure sprinkler systems, for example, the farmers then use some of that saved water to expand acreage or use more water-intensive crops, so their demands go up. Is there a cap on the farmers' rights so that will not happen?
Well, yes, and one of the things you're going to see when I step through in terms of how do we get from point A to point B is that was part of the fundamental part of the actual deal when they worked through this, is that they had to give something up in terms of making sure enough went into the river to meet the needs of the river and the fish, because they had threatened steelhead and they had the temperature concerns. So in that sense, if they didn't do it, they were going to be forced to do it by law. Okay, so yes, but there was still extra water, so they could actually move and do some of those other things, but it is capped in that respect. Okay, all right, so explaining the transformation, three things: pressure to change, opportunities to change, and transforming on-the-ground conditions into change. And I'll talk about each of those sub-points as we go along. To the extent that these conditions are in place, the argument here is that the likelihood increases of successful transition to the new integrated, I'm calling it the hydro-irrigation restoration system. Okay, pressure to change. So in this case, you have clear stream and habitat degradation. When you're completely dewatered, everybody notices. You've got warm water. I've mentioned too, you've got the 1990 ESA listing of mid-Columbia steelhead is threatened. There's a point at which, you just don't have a choice. You have to deal with that. Same thing with the Clean Water Act temperature violations. And from the farmer's perspective, there are concerns over economic viability of their farms given globalization. And even though the word climate change, and I don't have it in the slide, is not mentioned, when I talk to the farmers across the West, they may not say climate change, but they understand variable conditions and they understand the challenges of working in arid and semi-arid regions. And so they know that what these models are predicting, even if it doesn't all come true, pose real challenges to their farm operations. And most of the irrigators and farmers around the West if they're not anything, they are adaptable, okay? Because they have to be to survive. Okay, opportunities for change. Aging inefficient irrigation infrastructure. Obviously, if you already have a new super duper irrigation system that's state of the art, there's not going to be an opportunity there because you're not losing water to seepage and evaporation. Geophysical terrain. You got to have some fall. You got to have, it's got to run downhill. So if you're in Kansas, again, no aspersions on Kansas, but Kansas is pretty flat, okay? But having said that, small hydropower doesn't take much. 5 to 10 feet of fall, you can start thinking about it. Now that doesn't say anything about whether that will pass a cost-benefit test. But again, you've got to have some geophysical terrain. You've got to have access to sufficient upfront capital. That was the case here. They had funding from the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board, several foundations. They got lucky. 2009 Federal Stimulus Act, one of the few shovel-ready projects in the country, and that's how they viewed it. As soon as that came through, within 2 weeks they had the proposal, and they did get a good chunk of money out of these stimulus. Okay, here's what's interesting, just as a side note. 2 new 2013 federal laws, HREA and the Hydropower Development Act, passed by Congress, unanimous in the Senate on one of these. Only 7 dissenting votes in the House on one of these. The others were also massive, massive supermajorities, okay? So it's about rural development, it's about trying to get small hydropower up and running. So that's going to help people who are starting to consider this. They're designed to provide tens of millions in additional federal financing, accelerate regulatory permitting, which is a big reason why a lot of this stuff doesn't get done, and in general create greater certainty for private investors. Okay, not just public, but right now it's tough to invest because there are so many hurdles to jump through, and you're just not clear. So those laws are designed to take care of that. All right, so transforming on-the-ground conditions into change. Let's talk about collaborative partnerships. Okay, major nonprofits in this case joined with environmentalists, irrigators, politicians. They had local and state level politicians on board, state level agency officials, the U.S. Forest Service, the tribes, Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs, and the list goes on. They're all on board. They recognized that they had a common problem, and they were willing to work together, and they did work together to try to get this going. Research, without going into detail, into wicked problems suggests strongly that collaborative approaches are likely best. Okay, and I actually, now that I've helped to write this new book, I probably should rephrase that, or one of the good ways forward. At least that's what it looks like. There are other ways. In that new book, it lays out other types of strategies for trying to get your hands around wicked problems. To the extent trust is created, of course, more information for problem solving is shared. The idea of collaboration, more innovation, more customized solutions become possible. The goal of collaboration is positive sum, not zero sum, not you win or I win, you lose. Okay, it's about win-win-win. Okay, so positive sum. And as you saw, there are significant ones for the environment, including climate change with some more carbon-free energy, and for the farming economy. The irrigators, in these cases, they have to be part. If you're going to do a collaborative partnership, they have to be there. In this case, they own 90% of the water rights. So unless your plan is to blow up the prior appropriations water law, and I have many students who that is their solution, but unless your plan is to blow up the prior appropriations water law system, then irrigators need to be part of the solution in these cases. Cost sharing. You need to do cost sharing. If you look carefully at the kinds of goods that are being produced here, they're public in character. They're not private. So they benefit all. So if you do something good for the environment in one place and you've got more water, for example, it's going to mean you've got more water downstream. So there are benefits that connect these things together. And to the extent that the cost of providing such goods are shared, change is more likely. Okay? Especially given that the irrigators with the water rights have significant power to either resist or assist change. Okay? You can hit them with the hammer, but the argument here is that honey might be a better way to do it. Non-irrigation stakeholders in the White's case recognize this, and they help to secure some of that funding for the irrigation system overhauls. They were also chasing money for the environmental parts of the equation as well. Okay, this goes back to the question asked earlier about, is there a cap? Critical to these kinds of deals, making them work, are shared savings with the environment. Look at that first bullet under there. Many environmentalists fear that if they help irrigators build more efficient systems, all the benefit will go to them. It will all be economic. Okay, and so they'll jump on it and think about it. If it is more efficient, you do have a huge incentive. If you can produce a higher intensive, needs more water, it's premium value, you might double your income overnight. If you look at what's happened in New Zealand and Canterbury, where I've been working for the last 10 years, you don't see many forests in the Canterbury Plain anymore. They've switched over from dryland sheep farming too. You don't see nearly as many sheep. What have they done? They moved to dairy, because within 3 to 5 years you can triple your income. And it's created havoc with their water resources, okay? All right, so, and that's what I've been down there. They're doing a lot of collaborative governance, and they're trying to get their hands around it. It's a really tough situation. So shared savings are absolutely critical, and I've talked about how they reserved CFS for the ecology and for the stream flow. Okay, collaborative capacity builders and leaders. You've got to have leaders, and it just doesn't mean someone shows up and they lead the group, okay? They have to be part of the collaborative process. They have to be able to promote, we're all in this together, okay? They have to build that new culture, as well as champion the expected win-win-win benefits. What we've seen in the collaborative governance literature is you need people whispering in people's ears, because these are difficult negotiations, and hey, stick with it. We can make this work, and you're going to end up better off at the end, okay? Because sometimes in these complicated, wicked problem settings, it's not obvious at all, okay? Reputation of these leaders matters. They have to be considered fair, honest, high integrity, okay? What we see in collaborative governance measures is authoritative leaders who literally come with the authority of the government step into collaboratives time after time, and within 6 to 12 months, they're not the leaders. Okay, so what this says is that leadership in these kinds of things are organic, and we shouldn't just expect it to come from government, because sometimes the best leaders are the members of the community. Okay, and we see that, and a good government official will recognize that fact and will learn how to facilitate such leadership and not see it as a threat. Okay, White's Creek, the efforts had a number of such leaders. When it surveyed key participants, not over 90% named one or more of these 5 leaders. This was Deschutes River Conservancy, that's Todd Heisler, Ryan Houston, the Upper Deschutes Watershed Council, the 2 Brads, Brad Chalfont and Brad Nye at the Deschutes Land Trust, and then Mark Thalacker, Executive Director of TSIG. They were critical to success. And with respect to Thalacker, coming from the irrigator ranks, he was not only praised in the interviews for strong leadership and being good at building consensus and moving through obstacles to achieve goals, but for embracing reintroduction and restoration as an opportunity instead of a challenge to existing irrigation practices, despite the fact that some of his clients as landowners are pretty rough old cods, and I agree, who are pretty suspicious of all this conservation crap. And if you've been around the West, and you get that. I mean, that happens. And the one thing I did put down here that I don't think, or I hope is not an actual variable, is that Thalacker moved 20 years ago. He's a landowner up in the area from New York. So I could have put down as a variable, you have to be from New York to break heads, and I don't know, or New Jersey, Tony Soprano. No, anyway, he's not that kind of leader. Sorry, I went off point there. Okay, all right. Takeaways. In situations that to many look hopeless and so complicated that the wicked problem of water, energy, and climate change might not get solved, I would argue that there is hope. In this case, it's at the local level of arid landscapes and what appears from the outside, rigid systems of established water law. So the idea here is that change is possible. And note, you will not hear me ever say that it would ever be easy. Okay, it won't be easy. Second takeaway, if we want long-term solutions to these wicked problems, we need to recognize them as such and act accordingly. This means recognizing interconnectedness and interdependence and thinking carefully about which institutions and problem-solving processes we employ to address the problems. If we stick with the same old existing institutions, I don't think you're going to get there in many cases. Having said that, I am not here to tell you that collaborative governance is a panacea. Okay, there are many areas where you will have to bring the hammer down in order to get to the kinds of results that you see here. But that's a longer discussion. We also need to be sensitive to watershed conditions, as I've noted previously. Not everyone will meet the conditions. And the conclusion, again, I've been looking at these kinds of efforts for going on 20 plus years. The progress displayed in this case is recognized by knowledgeable folks as unexpected and remarkable, especially for a short period of time. 2007 to 2015, that's nothing when we think about these things. The lessons learned, however, suggest that with the right approach, the potential, okay, not the guarantee, the potential exists for similar successes in watersheds throughout the West. So I thank you for being here, and that wraps up the talk. So I think, do we have some time for...
Yeah, about 20 minutes for
Okay, for
questions.
questions?
Ed?
Do you want me to call? Yeah, Steve.
Thank you. I'm wondering, you seem to be implicitly saying that it's possible to create those kind of shared relationships that Ostrom discusses in an organic way, but you seem to suggest that they can be kind of goosed along, and they aren't just organic. But I'm wondering, what was it in your mind about this case at this time that caused all of these things to perfectly align? The opportunities, the shared relationships, everything. Is it just happenstance? Or is, there something else going on?
Right. In the article that I'm working on, so with the greater detail to flesh this out, one of the keys that really stands out is the leadership. But it also is a story of how 3 of the nonprofits, Deschutes River Conservancy, Deschutes Land Trust, and the Upper Deschutes Watershed Council, came together after trying to do things piecemeal and individually. It took them years to recognize their own interdependence. And it was at that point they came together and they created what they called the Deschutes Partnership. Okay? And as part of that, that fed into the leadership because you had really entrepreneurial leaders who saw the problem and were able to work with the irrigator. So in terms of that leadership, a key here too, it's like if you look at conditions for collaborative success, you've got to have the money. This was, we're not talking hundreds of thousands or millions, we're talking tens of millions of dollars here. Okay, so and they were able to use that leadership to tap into some significant funds. You're not going to find that in every irrigation district, okay? And so in that sense, I always go to that as kind of what really kicked it off. But here's the other thing. The Endangered Species Act listing tends to get people's attention, okay? It really does. And it's kind of one of those things that if you don't make some changes, you're going to be forced to do it in ways that you may not like. So if you're proactive, you can actually maybe get ahead of it and do things. And here's the thing: I don't know if all these efforts are actually going to stop the ESA from eventually being enforced within the next 10 or 15 years. They've made tremendous progress, but here's the thing, and I think I probably just zipped over it and zipped by it. In terms of adult steelhead returning, just a handful. So one of the criticisms of this project is each fish costs like $10 million. And again, but if you think about what we're talking about, here's the other thing. Honestly, if you really want to recover fish in this area, you've got to blow up the Pelton Round Butte Dam Complex. What? They are massive. They put in a $110 million fish ladder. It is the coolest, most high-tech fish ladder in the world. And anyway, and it goes in, there's a lot of issues with how the different streams flow into the lake and how it confuses the fish. But so in that sense, here, I'm sorry, in the back, yes.
Yeah, I was actually curious about the sort of source of the money for this project and whether you think, we have, hundreds and thousands of miles of streams that probably need similar attention. So where did the money come from for this project?
Well, again, the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board committed, I'm forgetting, it's multiple millions on a long-term basis. You had money from several foundations, including the Bonneville Environmental Foundation. You had the stimulus funding, and and there was some other funding, okay? But again, that's the reason I threw in the 2 new federal laws, is that there is now a concerted push, and they've started to create a legal framework to actually support these kinds of things. Now, having said that, there's only been a handful so far, and they're tending to take the more economics-oriented approach, which is what your question, again, expressed the concern about. Okay. Was there another question? I thought early on over here. Yeah.
With respect to your last slide about other watersheds in the West, do you think maybe that White's Creek is a softball example? For example, with the almonds out of California, each almond takes a gallon of water. Many of those are exported. They're health food. We all love them. You have to keep almond trees alive year after year, even in drought years. So that is a very tough problem compared to White's Creek.
I would agree. I mean, in other words, the one thing that I will say that I'm not quite sure how to address, because this is a single case study. I don't know how many actual cases across the West, if you were to map this, that you actually could make this work in. But if you think about that, we have thousands of watersheds. And given my experience of studying watershed management, again, of 20 plus years, I would say there's probably several hundred, but you're absolutely right. You're going to run into some scenarios and some situations, and it may be that, again, the area of the world you're talking about, their temperatures go here. White's Creek, goes here. And so, again, if you can get enough water in the river, that might offset those temperature effects from the ambient air temperature. But no, I that's something that literally remains to be discovered, and it is a good caveat. So thank you for that. Yes, question in the back, and then over here, Nick.
When you said get rid of the dam project, what dams are those, and how big are they? In power output.
I don't know. I don't know the power output. When they put them in the mid 1960s,
what dams are they?
The Pelton Dam, the Pelton Round Butte Dam Complex, Lake Billy Chinook, so on the Deschutes, and there. So I don't know the specifics, but that is what killed off the Chinook and Steelhead runs. Okay, they put in a fish ladder, but again, I guess I could say this now. What happened is you have really cold water spring-fed Metolius coming in. White's has most times of the year pretty cold water. You've got the Crooked River coming in. You've got the middle Deschutes. And the problem is all these temperatures hit Lake Billy Chinook, and when the fish got through the ladder, they had trouble navigating and figuring out just exactly where to go, because the way the temperatures were mixing created confusion. But that pretty much stopped it, and so that's the main thing.
What would you replace the generation source with? If you could get rid of the dam, like you said, what would you replace this with?
That's not the purpose of this talk, and I don't have a dog in the fight. But I guess if I were to speculate, one of the things you could think about is, and especially if you've got carbon free, and you look down along the Columbia, you've got a lot of wind farms that have been built there. I have no idea how big of a wind farm you would have to create in order to replace the electricity that comes off of that. Here's why that won't happen. With the FERC relicensing project that came about starting in the early 2000s, Portland General Electric, PGE, put in a bid to get their license renewed to keep producing electricity and so on. The tribes, Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs, put in a competing bid. FERC relicensing rules now have elevated fish to a par with electricity production as a consideration when granting licenses. PG&E was very smart, very proactive. They went to the tribes and they said, hey, let's do this 50-50. Electricity generation, the revenues, a huge amount of those are now flowing to the tribes, and it is bringing significant numbers of the tribal members out of poverty. So you're not blowing up those dams unless you're going going to tell the tribes to go back to poverty. So that's been kind of an interesting side development. Nick.
Yeah, this is a great presentation, and wicked problems are relentless and they will go on. But I think everyone's interested in how much generalization can we take from this case, because we have so many possible applications of it. And the question that Stephen asked, I to follow up on that. Who are these key people who see the vision and can communicate it to all the disparate shareholders with different values? You mentioned the partnership. What's their background? What's their education? Do they have boundary spanners, people who can talk science and policy effectively and translate science into application? I mean, that's what we're looking for on graduate education. What kind of people in strategic places can you put in a mix like that and articulate a vision that is doable?
Well, I think the difficult thing is, yes, it's important that we train those grad students, and I know that that's what we're trying to do at Oregon State University. Same thing. And so I teach a seminar on collaborative governance to try to get them ready for what they're going to see more and more in the world. But here's the caution that I would have, is that if you look carefully at these watershed collaboratives around the West, and you look at who's actually involved, you have cases like this where you have some tremendously talented, highly educated, one of these people, Heisler, came from, I'm forgetting, one of the national environmental organizations. He was a heavy hitter. He got burned out in D.C. He says, I'm moving my family, I'm raising them in Bend. But here's the thing. I would argue that what you saw in terms of how this came together there is the exception to the rule. You see across the West people who are coming up from the ag community or just from within the community. Many of them either don't have four-year degrees, or maybe they do have four-year degrees, but it's not the kind of things we're talking about. You have to have access to good science, you have to have those kind of people, but in terms of leadership and being organic, you can't just plop someone down in the middle of one of these things, because as I think, is it Tony Chung and it's either Greg Walker or Steve Daniels wrote some time ago, there's a psychological effect in terms of outsiders versus insiders. So one of the things you have to be careful with is the whole thing of hi, I'm from the government, I'm here to help you. That works only if you've established the kinds of relationships, working and trust-based relationship. And so I would argue one of the things we see, and Nick, I know in your research you've seen this too, are the local water, the conservation districts that come out of the federal agency, and I'm forgetting, NRCS? Mm-hmm. Yeah, NRCS. And so they are embedded in communities, and what we're learning is that you can have a leader with all the knowledge and the power connections of the world. If they're not embedded, they don't have the social relationships built. And we saw it with Mike Byerly, with the endangered species work that you and I did together. So yeah, it's complicated. I would say that. Yes, in the back.
So I'm a doctoral student. I'm involved in long-term stakeholder engagement in the Spokane River Basin. I'm just curious what your perspective is on the role that university-based folks, whether it's a faculty member or a graduate student, can play as that neutral party in these collaborative processes, whether or not as a participant or as someone that could potentially facilitate.
Well, I would say, and I guess maybe this was a miss on my part, if Nick was kind of angling at that. We do have, I think if you want to train people who are facilitators, people who are good at conflict resolution, they're intermediaries. The general rule is that most of these efforts, when they get started, they don't have that particular skill set. And so, and that would be partly a response, but we've also found that you don't necessarily need that. Sometimes you do have it in a community, but I would say that would be kind of the number one role. I think a really good secondary role is help them figure out what the users need in terms of good science to help them solve their problems. So we could be the ones where we can liaison And we could say, we're still going to have independent science, but so various different physical and natural sciences. Because one of the keys to successful collaboration is you've got to have good information. You've got to be able to map the ground, the ecological priorities, and so on and so forth. And quite frankly, that's usually one of the first and easiest things to do. What that means is we need experts. We need scientists to help. But I'm also a big fan, if you ever read Society of Natural Resources Journal, I spearheaded the creation of a new type of journal article starting about 3 years ago on practice-based knowledge. Because what we also find is that practice-based, local, culturally embedded knowledge, and especially people who've been on the farm or the ranch for 3 or 4 generations, they know one heck of a lot about how everything connects together. It's not always a substitute for science, and that's not what the argument is, but it is a valuable addition. And I would argue, if you want to learn more about that, you can go back and read the actual opening piece in Society of Natural Resources about 3 or 4 years ago, where we talk about why it's needed. But I would also urge you to go read James Scott's, I think it's 1996 or 1998, he's from Yale, and he wrote a book that had a huge impact on me called Seeing Like a State. It is a wonderful book that says if all you have is the expertise of PhDs in the science and you don't have some of this practice-based knowledge, you will end up often with massive tragedies, massive human tragedies. And he walks through the 20th century and lays out tragedy after tragedy. It's a really, I think it's a very compelling book. So
We have time for one last question.
all right, Amy.
This is a fabulous example of problem-driven research, and I thank you for that. And I also want to say it makes me feel so sad that we lost you to Nevada and Oregon. So hopefully we can get you back. So my question is, well, who knows?
No, it's a joke. It's a joke.
We'll have a discussion about that later.
Okay.
But, okay, so what I want to know is
Okay.
what are your plans for doing? What are you going to do with this? Because it seems to me you're kind of saying this is a one-off case study. And so there's 2 questions with problem-driven research, which is how are you going to use it in a practical practitioner way? Are you going to try to get the word out about all these different ingredients that come together to actually have success? You know, we talk about good practices and all this stuff in the practitioner policy world. And I'm just wondering what are the lessons that can be learned from this, given you seem to be saying it's a pretty isolated case. And then the second thing is in terms of theory building. You know, I'm going to ask that question. We can see all sorts of, applications of Kingdon's model, piggybacking on Nick and Steve's question. And I would, of course, urge you, you could actually get something out of this case study if you start doing some comparisons.
Right.
Yeah, and I'm hoping you're
Right.
going to do that, because
Well,
this is such a wonderful case study, but I don't think it should just stand by itself, because I don't think you're going to actually get you're not going to get the value added that you actually could get out of it. So I'm just curious.
Thank you, Amy. I appreciate the question, and you're right. I haven't decided where I'm going to go, but I will say this particular issue has piqued my interest in a way where I now have a PhD student at Fulbright, Mexico, and Patty Fernandez is. We're now doing an independent study on the entire water energy nexus. And she's going to be writing papers and teaching me as we go along. And we're going to, I don't know if it will actually be this specifically, because she's coming at it from her place in northern Mexico and all the very real water problems that they have. And she wants to be able to take a piece of it, it's undecided at this point, and kind of move it forward. As part of that, we're going to that independent study, I want to design a new course to actually get that into the curriculum at Oregon State, just basically, and so it would be bigger and broader about the water energy nexus and climate change and all that. We don't have anything like it. And my expectation is that as I move through those steps over the next 8 to 12 months, that I'm going to then push forward. So I know that's a weak answer to your overall question, and I'm just not quite sure how. I appreciate it. I appreciate the feedback, though.
Okay, I'm afraid our time is up. Before I ask you to join me in thanking our guests, remember tomorrow at 2 p.m. we have that debate and panel on the Washington Carbon Tax Initiative. That's in the Cub Auditorium tomorrow. And now you'll see, you will understand why we loved having Ed as a colleague. You'll also understand why he doesn't need a microphone. Join me now and thank you.
Sorry.
Moving